Good afternoon, and welcome to Unleashing the Power of Biotech in the Bay Area and Asia. We're going to be exploring possibilities, collaboration, and risks. We have an expert group of speakers from various backgrounds with us today. We're really excited to be hosting this program. Thank you to Greenberg Traurig and Howard Chen. Where are you? Where are you? There you are, hiding in the back over there. Thank you to you and your team for sponsoring this event. The idea came up when we were talking to Howard at GT, and we were thinking about ideas with the APEC summit approaching and with San Francisco being the host city. What were some big programs that we could do around this topic and area? We know we have a lot to offer here in the Bay Area, and we have a lot to learn from the 21 APEC economies that are all going to be coming here next month. So we're looking forward to a little bit of a preview of some of the topics that could be discussed when everyone comes here. On behalf of our team, welcome to our members and to our board. Buck G, I know, is here. Thank you very much for being here and supporting us. I'm Margaret Conley, the Executive Director of our Northern California team. In the room, we have Nina Udagawa, who's been working very hard on this program, along with Christy Young-Smith. I do want to take a moment to thank them very much. We have Jason Fong and Aaron Moroccan outside getting ready for phase 2 of our event. For our format today, first you're going to hear keynote remarks from Dr. Reg Kelly. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with 3 experts, Richard Dasher, Mika Nishimura, and Marietta Wu. Reg is going to moderate that discussion, and he's also going to introduce them in more depth momentarily. All of our speaker bios are on our website, and there will be time for audience Q&A. So when the time comes, if you have a question, raise your hand, and if Reg calls on you, wait for a microphone to be brought around so we can hear you in the recording, and introduce yourself, because we have a lot of new faces here today. We'd like to learn more about you. This event is on the record. The video will be posted on our website after the event. We have until 5:10 Pacific for this program, and then we have a nice happy hour, thanks to GT, outside. So please stick around. Talk to us, tell us about what you do. We'd love to learn more about you. And we're going to start now with a few words about Dr. Kelly. He is Professor Emeritus at UCSF, an expert in biochemistry and biophysics. He was the longtime director of QB3, an innovation center devoted exclusively to biology and life science industries. He has been a champion of the development of biotech in San Francisco, really bridging academia and industry. And so we thought he would be the perfect person to kick off our inaugural biotech program. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Reg Kelly.
Well, thanks for all coming here. It's quite an event. We're going to talk about unleashing biotechnology, right? It's strange. When I was young, what we talked about, unleashing the atom, right? And now, was that a good thing for society or not? That's one of those sort of slightly controversial things. So I think one of the nice things, this should be a sort of controversial meeting. Let's look and see what's good about biotech and what's maybe not so good about biotech, right? So that, I think, will come out of the discussion today. So I'm going to to set the stage for the panel discussion here, I'm going to talk about 3 sort of things. General, what is missing, right? What do we need? What do we need the biotech industry for? The second is, what sort of things are going on in the Bay Area right now that address those things and we should be proud of? And then the third, which will be quite short, is what is not working, right? What might we do better? Because when we think about how we might collaborate with other countries and how we might collaborate with other people, knowing what's not working is actually a best place to start. So that's a sort of format of what I'm going to say. So what sort of things are really needed just now in biotech should address? Let me see first of them, aging, right? We all know almost throughout the world, except Africa, the ratio of old people to young people is getting bigger and bigger, right, as we all live longer, right? Now, it turns out, as we know also, that when you look at the people that come into our hospital, 90 to 95% of them have diseases that are related to aging. Normally you're healthy up to about 45, but after that, your chances of getting sick goes up almost exponentially until you're about 98, right? So what happens, since we've got more old people, and old people get sick, the burden of health on societies in Asia, Europe, and America is getting increasingly worse. And so you're getting more cost of health on fewer people, young adults who are generating money. It's a huge problem for society. problem one, right? Problem two, which is sort of related. If you drive in here around San Francisco a bit, one of the problems you'll see is the number of homeless people on the street, right? We all know that. We don't like that. One of the things they estimate that 1/3 to 1/2 of those people actually have psychiatric problems, right? They have some mental diseases. Now, if you're a reasonably wealthy parent and you've got someone who's got schizophrenia, you can maybe afford to look at them. But if you're poor, you haven't got the resources, so a schizophrenic kid will end up on the streets here. Right? So if we could do something about trying to get psychiatric diseases under control, that would be great. But I've been told there have only been 2 major psychiatric drugs come up in the last 50 years, right? We're not developing drugs for those people. I'm thinking more about brain disorders as well as psychiatric disease because, of course, the diseases of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, frontotemporal dementia, and so on, these appear, they're in the late category. Schizophrenia comes on in your late teens, early 20s. These other, Parkinson's comes on when you're old, but we'll see those 2 areas are joined, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The third thing that needs to be changed is diagnostics. Like you go into your doctor, he puts on a stethoscope on your chest, takes your blood pressure and temperature, and he says, oh, you're manic depressive, or you've got idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Those are words, right? They don't tell you anything. That's just putting a name on it. It's like naming a flower. It doesn't give you any insight into what your disease is. What we really need is to say, you're sick because this is your organ that's sick, and this is what's wrong with your organ, right? Then, of course, if you knew that, you could begin to know how to fix it. So we've got to get diagnostics away from this semantic thing of giving names to disease and make it molecular. Now, the nice thing is those 3 areas are all being addressed in the Bay Area in, I think, quite exciting ways, right? Let's take the thing about aging first. Oh, by the way, I don't know if the Asia Society arranged this, but in this week's Economist, it's all about living to 120. So the whole major section in the middle here is about the problems of aging and how you can do it. So I don't know if you managed to do that, Margaret, but it was really nicely timed. So what is happening then? Aging in the last 20 years, so is because of the work done on fruit flies and flatworms, was mainly thought about something to do with eating, right? People are thinking, how does eating? Well, that's been the area that's been studied a lot. It's still fairly interesting, but it's old, so I'm not going to talk about it. What's, I think, quite different is a different evolving idea of aging. That is, we have in our bodies our own anti-aging mechanisms that keep us young, right? A way of thinking about this, we know cars get old, right? And our bodies get old. The difference is when we have cars, we almost have an auto mechanic sitting in the back seat of our car that when something goes wrong with us, it can fix it, right? So we have our own endogenous way of fixing the problems as we get older. Why do we get old? Because when the auto mechanic gets sick or dies or gets lost, right? It's when you lose the ability to correct those defects, that's when you begin to get old. And so one of the things now is, can you find what that auto mechanic is, right? And can you find drugs that stimulate that? So that's a sort of approach that's been taken by Elector, Denali, Calico, and Altos, for example, in the city. So there's major areas going into this, trying to pursue this. Now, let me just say one thing which is a little unusual and maybe specific to the Bay Area, and I'd like to hear about this later. Those companies that are starting to look really seriously aging are like Altos and Calico. They are not conventional businesses created to make money. One was decided by Google. Google doesn't need any more money. The other comes from Yuri Milner at Altos. He put $3 billion into Altos. He doesn't need any money. But they're not putting their money into non-profit research institutes the way we used to think about it. They're putting their money into companies. Now, these are funny sort of companies, right? You know, you're not there to make money, but you're not a non-profit. What are you? So I don't know what to call them. So my way of describing them are delayed profit companies, right? So they can take 10 years before they can come a profit in this way. But this is actually an emerging problem. When government doesn't handle problems, often philanthropy can come in and do it. We in the Bay Area are lucky because so many young people who are very altruistic have made a lot of money and are looking at ways of investing it back in society. So that's, I don't know if other places are doing that, but it's certainly a characteristic of the Bay Area. Second problem, mental disorders. Why are we so few drugs coming through in this area? Well, one is, how can you actually know if your drug works? It's very hard. You can't have a fruit fly or a flatworm getting dementia, right? You can't study that. And you can't even do it very well in mice. And so you have to, how do you actually get data for, this is a human disease, and how can you just study a human disease when you haven't got an animal model? It's a big challenge, right? So, two clues. One is you can actually begin to use genetics. And use genetics to see, well, which genes do you find tend to be represented in the people who get those diseases? It's never simple, never one gene per disease, but you can see families of genes appearing. And it turns out that in both cases, for late dementias like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and schizophrenia and autism, it turns out the immune system is involved, right? Big surprise, but that's what the genetics say. And so what that's doing is triggering a whole new approach here to say, just like we have immunotherapy of cancer, which is the way cancer is being changed, can we have an immunotherapy of brain disorders? So that's another area that's really taking off in the Bay Area quite strongly right now. Third thing, this is then diagnostics. What's wrong with that? As I mentioned, the names getting idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis doesn't help you much. You know, idiopathic means we don't know what causes it, right? That's what that means. So, so how can one think differently? Well, what we've learned, and this has been our biggest transformation of molecular biology in the last 10 years, is that when you look at the genes that are in a cell, it doesn't help you very much because every cell has the same gene, right? So there's a little mutation, but they're not being very informative. What turns out, what makes one cell different from another is not its shape or anything. It's which of those genes are turned on and which ones are turned off, right? So if you just look at a cell, you don't know what it is, and see which genes are turned on and turned off, that tells you what type of cell that is, right? So you can define it by what genes are on and off. Now, what happens when that cell gets sick, right? There's changes, genes are turned on and off. So if you can now look and see what genes get turned on and off when that cell is sick, voila, you've got a molecular fingerprint of what that disease is, right? You can look and see this is what's going on here. You know you've got a molecular diagnosis of which cells are doing it and what's wrong with that cell. This is not fanciful. I was just actually, this lunchtime, I was down visiting a company called Molecular Stethoscopes down at South San Francisco. What they have done is made use of one other factor, I should tell you. When cells get old and sick, they tend to actually, little bits of them fall off, you know, bud off and things like that. Then it's not garbage. It might be physiological, but cells do it, and especially when cells get sick, they tend to bud off little bits of themselves. What that means is those little bits come into the blood. Now, if you go into the blood, you can get those little bits and look and see where, looking at the genes that are expressed in that, you can see which cell did this come from and what was wrong with that cell. What they have published 2 years ago now, in a very spectacular paper, I think, that if you take Alzheimer's, you know, and look at people before who don't have Alzheimer's, and you can tell by looking at the genes that are expressed in this garbage in the blood, you can tell the difference between Alzheimer's and things. And if you can actually tell the difference between advanced Alzheimer's and not advanced Alzheimer's. This is a big breakthrough. Before this happened, if you wanted to say whether a person had Alzheimer's or what sort of Alzheimer's they had, you had to wait till they died and did post-mortem on the brain. Now that, of course, didn't help the patient very much, right? If you wait till they're dead to do this. So, so here now we've got essentially a transformative technology. We have now at last able to do something to diagnose whether someone has Alzheimer's and whether a drug is working on Alzheimer's. I have to say this is passionate for me. My wife just died about a year ago of Alzheimer's. And I sat through the clinical trial with her as they tried to give her a therapy. And what that involved was trying to draw clock faces, you know, or say the fingers on your hand. The error bars in those measurements are enormous, right? So when you try to do a clinical trial using the standard things, one, it takes years, you've got to do thousands, and it gets so expensive that people can't afford to do clinical trials on things like Alzheimer's. So getting these molecular diagnostics are truly transformative, right? So that's the three things I wanted Oh no, yeah, diagnostics, these things I wanted to talk about. Let me say a little bit about what's not working, and that might come up a little bit later here. Oh, let me say one thing about the Alzheimer's stuff, talking to them. What they're really short of is enough blood samples. You've got to train your machines. It's all done by machine learning and robotics to try and do this, using the new technologies that everyone uses nowadays. But you need to get enough blood samples. It's not the machine learning is terrific, but where'd you get the blood? There's not enough samples around tested. So if there was ways one could work with, say, the British Alzheimer's situations or Chinese or Malaysia or anyone and try to pool and agree together to try and get the data, everything's ready to go. What they're short of is blood samples. So we could find ways of bringing, the Asian Society could work on this actually, and try to bring ways of getting more blood samples to get these sort of diagnostic. And this idea would work for Parkinson's, frontotemporal dementia. It might even work for schizophrenia, right? So it's a tremendous way to think about things. All right, what's not working? What's not working in the Bay Area is two companies, one of which was 500 people in it, failed in the last 2 years. And they were both in synthetic biology, right? They were trying to use, instead of using chemical engineering to make high-value compounds, they were trying to get bacteria and yeast to do it. So both Zymergen and Emeritus both more or less tanked in the last year. What's also not working very well, various companies are trying to see, can we use biology to solve the climate problems, right? Can we, for example, get things that photosynthesize better? We can substitute so we don't need to get fertilizer. They're not getting very well funded. Diagnostics. This great idea about diagnostics, it's very, very hard to get venture capitalists to put money into diagnostics. Antibiotics. Here, we're getting bacteria resistant to antibiotics all over the planet. The companies in America are closing down their research areas in antibiotics. So I can go on in this, but there's probably different explanations for all of these things. But one common theme, which may come up later, is it's a failure of the market economy. Right, the American market economy, which requires people to make money, which requires their investors to make money, requires the shareholders to get increased return on their shareholders. Anything that doesn't do that enough compared with making cancer immunology just doesn't get funded. So if you can't get money from investors, the only other places are philanthropy and government. There's no other real sources of money. So maybe other countries which have a more sensible approach, or a different, don't be judgmental, a different approach to how they run their economic system, maybe we can work with them to try and solve those diseases which are not yet solved. Do I have a minute more? Okay, I'm going to do something now. I always like to do stuff that's a little bit weird. So what I'm going to talk about is something which would be, I think, highly controversial, but it's a little bit close to my heart. How can one deal with irrational thinking? Now, many of us have seen a lot and worried especially in the last few years, about how it is that people who are apparently intelligent, apparently well-educated, can believe that the earth is flat, for example. They believe that women should stay home and raise children all the time, right? They believe that there's no climate problems going on, or believe that vaccines don't work. All of this, we have friends like this, and they're well-educated and intelligent. When you ask them, because it's a puzzle. When you ask them why they think that way, well, they've got a gut feeling about this. They've got a good feeling. In fact, our previous president used to say that all the time. I've got a gut feeling about this stuff. Now, to a neurobiologist like myself, what is a gut feeling? A gut feeling is actually your unconscious mind, right? Your conscious mind, we know all about Cartesian logic and all the rest of it, but most of the things we do are done by our unconscious mind. Like when you're driving a car, you're not thinking about it, you're walking, you're not thinking about how you walk. Your brain gets programmed. Now your brain there's not enough data in your genes for your brain to be specified to know how to walk and so on. You actually learn how to do these things during the early years of your development because of your environment. Your brain is set up to work optimally in any environment you're in. We're beginning to understand that's called critical period thinking, right? So, for example, if you've brought up in a house where it's subject to sexual abuse all the time, and you try and go out in the world after, you've not been trained to function very well in society. That's a classic problem with social workers, right? So we get programmed in our early things. Now, we as neurobiologists are just beginning to work out what the circuits are in the brain and what the pathways and what the neurotransmitters are that actually give you unconscious learning. So here's the thought. Suppose biotechnology came along in 10, 20 years and said, we can take a flat earth believer and do something to them, reprogram so they can now look for the first time ever at the facts without all the unconscious stuff they got in their childhood, right? Now, if we could do that, would you want to do it? And if you wanted to do it, who would decide what that person has to believe? So that might be something that's best discussed over beer or wine later on tonight. So what time? That was my introduction. We're okay with time? So now I'm going to invite the distinguished panelists to come up here, and we're going to start with Mika Nishimura, and it's Marietta Wu, and then Richard Dasher. Now I'm going to ask each of them to stay a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, about what they do, but just give a little introduction to who they are and what their skill set is pertinent to this meeting today. Then we'll have them each give a session, and we'll ask questions. I'll ask them a few questions, and then it's open to you guys, and just have fun, just asking them any sort of things you want, right? So we're going to start off with, you got a microphone, Nika?
Yeah,
All right.
I believe this is on, right? Okay, cool.
Mika, the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mika Nishimura, and I have been mostly in medical device industry. So Reg introduced himself, as being a biochemist and, molecular biologist, and I'm a visual gal. So I need to be able to touch and see, the tools that are being used by physicians to take care of patients. So I come from that background. Nowadays, of course, a lot of things are merging between physical devices and data and AI. Software is driving a lot of things, personalization, precision medicine, et cetera. So the fields are definitely converging. And, when you think about the field of biotech, ultimately it really is about how do we treat the patient? What is the best way to treat patient? And sometimes it's the drug approach. Sometimes it's the device. Sometimes it's combination. You use diagnostics to see, okay, which patients would really benefit from this drug or from this device. And sometimes it's really a holistic approach to patient management. So, you think about, all right, before this patient becomes so sick, are there ways to intervene early, through data, through digital health approach, and then you need to go on. So some people, and by the way, so my background, I started in med tech in the cardiovascular field, so heart disease, then to stroke and peripheral artery disease. So I was on the plumbing side of med tech. A little bit of electrical side of things with neurostimulation. I now sit on the board of a company that deals with orthopedics, so now I'm moving into the carpentry sort of thing. So when, Reg talked about the car and breaking it down and do you have an auto mechanic? So I kind of think about medical device in that terms. When you have a house and you've got a rotten foundation, you might need to bring in a carpenter, to address that. When things are clogged in your arteries, you need a plumber to fix that, or replace your valve. And then when signals are not going right, whether it's causing mental health disease or Parkinson's or heart failure, you might need to rewire the electrical signals. So you need to bring an electrician with all the tools. So that's kind of what MedTech is about. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marietta Wu. I'm a venture capitalist. Actually, I'm a physician and scientist by training, and started my career with the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, initially on the discovery research side and gradually moved to the business side. Over 15 years ago, I joined life sciences investing as a VC, starting with actually a life sciences focused fund here in San Francisco, just a couple of blocks down the street from here. And it's quite amazing over the past 15 plus years how therapeutics and biotech has technologies has advanced. These days, we look at cancer, as a potentially manageable chronic disease, and cell and gene therapy also offered many individualized options for patients, and certainly, RNA has rapidly advanced to help us combat the COVID pandemic, and also potentially expanding into other therapeutic areas with the next generation RNA technologies. So we are in a very exciting time, and really look forward to sharing more with this panel here. Thank you.
So I guess I'm the university representative on the panel, although, Reg, you could be that too. I'm really an expert in innovation processes and innovation in different business cultures across Asia. So I do a lot of following of trends in different Asia economies, and I've been on a number of grant funding programs. Multidisciplinary grant funding programs where I've looked at a lot of biotech research, from stem cell work to immunology to other kinds of now quantum computing. So I cut my teeth really on the technology development side, and in that regard, medtech is an area of application. Right? Biotech is really usually defined as the combination of biosciences and engineering sciences. So that's on the technology development side. And one of the things that has been happening throughout our whole discussion this afternoon already is this is Silicon Valley culture all over the place. We are so good at kind of taking the technologies that are coming out as a given and finding the new areas of application that have the most potential. So we think from that, right? You started talking about aging, you started talking about psychological problems, and so that's the way we think. I think that in looking at what's going on in Asia, it's also important to look at the production side. The research and development that's going on, the government policies that are going on to promote the use of this kind of combination of biosciences and information technology a lot of time, but other engineering too. So that's kind of how I come to this, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
So one of the things, since he's from Stanford and I'm from UC, we can say there was a recent study done about which of the universities in America were the top in spinning out entrepreneurship, startup companies, and it turned out the top two in the country were Berkeley and Stanford. Actually, it turned out Berkeley was ahead, but I won't make much of about that. So let me tell you, Mika, one of the things that's, that actually is in this country, but perhaps more extreme in Asia, is there's a difference between the rich and the poor. And we have all this discussion, a criticism of what we're doing in this with our technologies, is that it's a technology for the rich. Do you see much of that going on in Asia?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that is true, that a lot of the innovations that come, particularly in my field, medtech, are driven by university research, technologies that are developed here in the US or in Western Europe. Clinical trials are done here. The venture capital money, comes from mostly US and European investors. And as a result, and they all need to make money, because we're not funded by philanthropists. And when you look at where the money is and follow where the money is, it is going to be mostly on treatment devices or therapeutics, not diagnostics, as Reg said. And it's going to be for expensive, advanced technologies that serve the Western countries. And in Western countries, I'm certainly including some of the Asia, countries that are the higher income ones with great infrastructure to deliver health, right? And a lot of the innovations are coming in the form of, very advanced robotic tools, for example, or a minimally invasive treatment for cancer. or expensive imaging systems coupled with software to identify, okay, of these lesions that we're looking at, which ones are cancerous and which ones are not. But we're not talking about some of the technologies and where you really, can have impact on the developing countries. A lot of the challenges, have to do with, okay, what's the infrastructure to support, something like this, the government funding to fund healthcare delivery, where the pricing is, do you even have, a way to distribute the technologies or the physicians to perform these things? So there certainly are areas where there are the haves and the have-nots. Unfortunately. Now, here in this country, too, it's not uniform, right? If you happen to live in the Bay Area, have access to wonderful medical institutions like UCSF and Stanford, and you're a lucky person, you will get world-class care. But if you live in rural, say, Alabama, and you are a Black mother, your chance of dying in childbirth is that equivalent to many of the developing countries. All right, so it's not just about the haves and have-nots, by country, but it's within certain countries too. We have unfortunately not a type of system where you have universal healthcare and great access like you see in some of the European countries, and so as a result, we have the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, I have to say this, I'm hoping this is a sort of issue that's going to come up at the APEC meeting, because this whole thing about, the disparities between the rich and the poor. For example, all the stuff being able to do genetic treatments now to do sickle cell anemia. But it costs about $1 million a patient or something at the moment, right? So it's clearly not possible for most of the people who need that. And it's actually interesting, Jennifer Doudna, who's at Berkeley with me, she has just did a big study, because she does genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, and tried to see how could she knows about this problem, what could they do to try and solve it? And the solution they came up with lots of people, is actually, again, one needs to change the economic system. So it turns out you can't really discuss health without discussing economics at the same time. So Marietta, do you want to try and...
Sure. Maybe I can add my 2 cents as well. I think certainly the healthcare system in each country is different, but towards East Asia and specifically, to areas like Taiwan and China, there is a basic insurance provided by government. In Taiwan, it's universal healthcare. In China, for the very basics, I think it's universal healthcare as well. So when I started going into venture investing in the biotech industry, I also started to look towards Asia, to look towards East. And initially, we started doing some of the investment and starting companies. In Taiwan, we started companies that, or invested in companies that mostly improve drug profiles, and expand therapeutic indexes. And in China, in fact, we started with setting companies that really bring transformative medicines into that country, because 10 years ago, it takes between 7 to 10 years for any marketed drug in the West to enter China. And that certainly has rapidly changing. And very excitingly to say, these days for these regions has made great advancement, and the drugs and truly transformative medicines are entering the country at much faster speed. And more excitingly, we start to also see innovations start to emerge from the region on the East too. So I think as people, get more wealthier in the East, people naturally wanted to seek for better medicines, for better treatments. And while U.S. is still the dominant market for a lot of the therapeutics and healthcare, I think that region is gradually evolving and start to really also producing innovation that potentially can come to the U.S. market and European market.
So let me ask you then a specific question about this right now. It's very clear that aging and Alzheimer's is a huge problem in China, right? And so what we'd all like to see is, I think most of us would like to see Asian countries in America working better together the way they used to a few years back, because it's been bad. So if you were talking to APEC people and saying, here, this is a Chinese problem, this is something people is doing here, this is what your governments could do to try and facilitate the discovery of diagnostics and therapies for aging and dementias, Alzheimer's. Do you have any specific suggestions you would make to the leadership of those countries?
Well, I think health is a global problem, and science really doesn't have any borders, and it really takes people around the world to work together to advance these technology. And specifically, I think, while I am actually a therapeutics guy, but specifically, I think towards the diagnostic side, East Asia actually has a lot to contribute. For example, when we talked about the national healthcare system in Taiwan and in those areas, when we talked about diagnostic, when they have their advanced data management system in Taiwan, it's very advanced. Everything is on a card and the system is wired. So that those kind of centralized data and access can really help with the diagnostic industry in terms of advance because of the digitization of the data, just from my perspective.
Well, maybe I'll ask you later how we can connect the Taiwan government up to this company I just talked to at lunchtime today, because that's what they need, more annotated samples.
I wanted to add on to what Marietta said, that for example, AI is all the buzz, right? But we all have been warned that it can't be garbage in, garbage out. So do you have a representative data set? Do you have robust data? And that's not always the case if you are just purely gathering data in certain population like the US, right? Just as you said, you don't have the entire data set that you might need to really tease out, what is driving, this disease, or what patients, what sort of characteristics, put patients at higher risk, for this particular disease, or who might respond better, to this type of treatment or whatnot. And, one area that, the US has been really bad in clinical studies is including underrepresented groups. It wasn't really until like a couple decades ago that women were allowed to participate in many clinical trials. So let alone, some of the Asian population, the African American population, Hispanic population. Same with Asia, so if we don't really have robust data set that is truly global, for a lot of these disease states, we're going to be missing opportunities. So I think that is a huge area for potential collaboration.
So Richard, I was going to ask you, since you have the advantage of looking at lots of different technologies from your position down at Stanford, are there things you can learn from other areas that could be beneficial in biotechnology?
Sure, but I think I'd like to comment first on this previous topic about kind of what's missing from the American system. The venture capital system is based on very high return and clear exit, either by acquisition by an even bigger company or by going public on the markets. So of course they're going to go after the maximum kind of capital gain. There are many kinds of new technologies and new ideas for development that don't fit into that model. And we have focused a lot on that model here in the US, but I think if you look at some of I would say Europe even more than Asia, you see a slower, more organic kind of growth is acceptable to investors. You have more traditional financial institutions who are getting involved in investing in startup companies, really. And so it's not completely unheard of that some of these things could come into market. But I think that, again, when you look at the haves and the have-nots have a different set of opportunities. How to improve access to public health. And that's something where Asia might take the lead and we would learn from them. Because, as you say, in some rural places in some American states, access is horrible. So I think that that's an area. We've had a number of topics that are kind of politicized for one reason or another. So sure enough, it was Japan that came up with iPS stem cell research before anybody else did. And that kind of area is certainly something that we should be looking at possible, sources of innovations in Asia and opportunities for collaboration. Data is a big one. Now, one of the problems is how any kind of health data has to be managed. HIPAA in the United States is a big issue, but there are some new technologies where the data never leaves the server that it's stored in. And instead, the algorithm that's going to analyze the data is sent out in a very carefully orchestrated way to the different servers, updated, and then the algorithms come back, the kind of sub-algorithms come back to central processing so that you get around all that privacy issue. But I do think that, we are going into kind of a difficult time because you have to be careful how the data is collected before you can start to share data. You really have to make sure that it's the right quality to be shared, that you've got the right kind of training data to feed into it, and so forth. Yeah, that's my comment for now.
Actually, talking to these people at lunchtime, they were saying in some cases, there's people collect lots and lots of data and say, we've got all this data, you can have it, we don't know what to do with it. And that's, in fact, now watching the way science is going a little bit in the Bay Area, most of our students think a thing to do with their thesis is just to accumulate lots of data and put it in storage and give it away to everyone. And there's no hypothesis that comes out. They say, oh, we'll give it to machine learning to come up, and that will tell us what my data means. So there's a little bit, actually, a lot of data collection going on that is perhaps not very, very useful. Let me ask you, Sivi, when I was over in Thailand recently and talking to people there, they were talking about whether their students being trained in Thailand should begin to think about whether they come still to the United States to be trained to go back, or whether you should be thinking of going, it's actually more useful now to go to China for training or to Japan for training, in fact, and be thinking of it more of an Asian educational system and just leaving America out of it. So would you, if you met a Thai student, what would you say to them about where they should go to continue their education?
Is that me or who? Oh,
I'll give it to Marietta. You take it. No, you take
okay.
it. Yeah.
I'll go first. Look for the professor. You can search on the internet and find the right place because it may be in northern Finland. You never know. I think that this is the strength that we have with the interconnected kind of technology that we have now. And I do unfortunately see an increasing rift between sort of the China bloc and the America bloc, and what used to be called the Global South is sort of looking at each one and wondering who to pay attention to. With regard to advanced technology, though, a lot of that has always been very international. When I first started the center that I'm working at Stanford 30 years ago, I was talking to somebody from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and he said, why do we need information about what's going on in Japan? If it's any good, it'll be in Science and Nature. But the problem is, once you get one more step applied into the area where the companies are going ahead of the academic institutions, you do have a time lag. The companies are not motivated to publish in the public domain. And so I think that we do still have challenges for knowing what's going on.
So actually, I'd heard, I don't know if this is still true, that if a Chinese company invests in anything here in America, then as an investor, they can't be on the board, or they're not allowed to be on the board because they're Asian. They're Asian. Is that correct? Is that?
The CFIUS rules are kind of complicated, and the big issue now is, will there be reverse CFIUS that prevents American investors from investing in kind of the China bloc? Right now, there has to be a clear wall between the investor, if they're Chinese at least, and what's going on here, so that advanced technology information that is under export control of some sort is not leaked through the board. Okay, so that is an issue. The big problem with this system is that, one, it's reactive. The technology is at least a year ahead of where the government regulations are. And we've got to figure out a way around that. The second problem is that it's really expensive for a startup company. Before you can take investment, if you have to hire a lawyer to find out how CFIUS applies to your company, you're talking 6 months and $300,000. So, you know, we do need a better approach to this.
And is that also true for biotech companies as well?
It could be, because so much biotech involves advanced information technology analysis of biological information.
All biotech is under it.
Is it all biotech?
All of it.
Okay.
And all AI is under CFIUS. So
I know all AI is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really relates to selected areas. I think specific to our industry, in terms of therapeutics, there are a number of sensitive areas that you need to steer clear. But as to more mature technologies relates to therapeutics, it is not considered sensitive. So the sensitive areas includes anything relates to human data, and anything relates to gene therapy, iPS, stem cell, these areas. I think these are supposedly sensitive, really, because they are related to genetic information and gene therapies. But if we are just talking about traditional therapies, small molecule, large molecule, these areas, then I don't think it's considered a sensitive area, because
Do you
after
actually
all,
believe that it's really to do, they're not letting people get they're worried about people get genetic information, they're not just trying to protect the profits of the companies here? Do you actually believe that because it would seem that you can understand if national security is involved, why you don't want to let people get into your secrets. But when you're talking about health, I mean, that's something which should be universal. So I can't really buy that argument. Can you?
You want basically, if you can make a drug, you can make a weapon. And this is, the whole issue. And it's not, it's not just the United States. Everybody is much more concerned about data sharing and data security than ever before. So I had a speaker from China on smart cities, not bio, but smart cities. And he showed a chart of all of the buses in Chengdu. And he had to obfuscate the numbers because that was considered a national security item where the buses were located.
so it's mutual, actually. It's not just for the US or China, it's mutual, some of those areas identified. But generally speaking, I think for our industry, if it's human health related with established technology, then it's less sensitive.
Mika, you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, because it seems like, we've been kind of focusing more on the tension, between the China bloc and the US bloc. But, don't get me wrong, because China is an enormous market for health. And, a lot of companies really do rely on China for growth, their revenue growth. They know that in the US, they may be, just reaching maximum penetration, same with Western Europe and all that. And China has been the growth engine for many, many companies in medtech industry. Now, it's always with a bit of wary, thought that we approach the Chinese market, because the government keeps on changing rules about a lot of things, including what's the pathway, what are the requirements to get regulatory clearance, because we work in regulated industry, and they can change it. And they don't change it the way FDA may change it after a lot of public hearings and getting opinions, from the industry and whatnot. They can just kind of change it and say these rules are in effect next month. So as a company, that's hard to deal with that. There's also been nationalism in the Chinese market that for you to participate in a lot of public tenders, that you need to have local manufacturing, or you have to have a local partner. And so that's putting a lot of pressure, and also this wariness about some of the technology transfers that may come along, and potential for IP theft, quite frankly. So that becomes a bit of a risk calculation. The prices also, do come down. So are you able to protect your margin? Does it have negative implications on your business in other parts of the world? Or could it be more opportunity-wise, if you can make a product that's geared for a certain segment of China, can you use that same product for other developing countries where the price sensitivity exists? So there are a lot of opportunities and risks, both ways, but most companies just cannot ignore China and say, we're not going to deal with that country.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mika's point, in fact, increasingly what we have observed is there are de novo innovations coming out of that region, and that's coming to the US as well. And big farmers as well as biotech companies are taking advantage of those opportunities and bring those innovations to the Western world. And I think that's probably going to be the next tremendous opportunity for our industry.
So I think the nice thing about this is that there are areas where you still see quite a bit of collegial cooperation. It may be more in the university sector than it used to be, but certainly the university sector has still got a lot of people talking to each other, even though we've got an export control office. As long as it's going to public domain, it's not subject to export control. It's when you get IP that it becomes subject to export control. So I think that there are forums in which we can still have good cooperation. And I also think that there are areas, we haven't talked much about the sort of agricultural technology applications of biotech. And there could be other areas that are much more commercial in which we could cooperate a lot more closely.
Now, maybe during discussion, if anyone's interested, we can talk more about AgTech, because I have some thoughts. We're going to open it up for questions for the club, but just before we do it, it says if we had one recommendation you could make then about how we could actually foster better interactions between Asia and the West here in the areas of biotech. Do you have any concrete things for me to give you time to think about it? One of the things that's really disheartening is like fewer and fewer pharmaceutical companies are working on Alzheimer's or on brain diseases because the trials cost too much, and so the success things is so bad. So if we could just reduce the cost of trials by trying to partner with places in Asia, that would be a phenomenal event. Now, that's given you a chance to think.
Yes, actually, that's exactly one of the major areas of opportunity lies because Asia has a large population. And if, from a global trial standpoint, if we could incorporate one of the East Asia countries as one of the sites, it offers the diversity of ethnicity in your patient population, and two, it could really accelerate your recruitment rate in that regards. And many more and more companies actually have started to do that since China joined ICH, and in accelerating their drug development as well as managing cost. But for our industry, actually time is really what matters. It really beats even the cost in that regards.
Mika, you got thoughts?
Yes, so in addition to massive clinical trials, actually certain countries are really good at doing early feasibility work, less bureaucratic red tape to go through than other countries. So if you're trying to do the first in human studies, it's often easier to go to certain countries like that. So that's another opportunity. And the third is again this if you have to design a product and not just kind of skinny down what's been developed for US or for Western Europe, but if you have to reimagine and say, okay, what does it take to deliver effective therapy in this type of economic situation, you can probably come up with very effective things that can also translate well to other more developed countries. Again, the rural areas in the US or whatnot. And I know, for example, in maternity care areas in Africa, in Asia, there were a lot of great approaches using midwives, nurses, health coordinators in the community, digital aides, because everybody's got a smartphone, even in these countries. So you can reimagine how you deliver care and deliver technology to improve outcomes and safety for these patients without the preconceived notions of delivery has to take place in a hospital setting type of a thing.
So kind of from a more economics and business perspective, it's not only the most advanced technologies, it's not only the most leading edge science. Look at what's going on around Asia, and you're seeing the growth of a new middle class everywhere. And so the opportunities that the new middle class have often don't involve nearly such advanced problems as it is things like wellness or different lifestyles and how to make sure that we can take advantage of opportunities that will be good for health everywhere. So I think that really, purely in terms of business, it's not just the leading edge stuff. It's really where are the needs of the people? And all around Asia, you're seeing economic growth that's 3 times as fast as in the United States. Even though China has slowed down a lot, Southeast Asia is around 6 or 7% right now. And so there are great opportunities.
Good. So now the arrangement is we now, for 15 minutes, are going to open it up to questions and answers from the audience. So which one of you? Yeah, good. Do you mind using the microphone? Sure.
We've talked Asia versus U.S. Could someone address reactive medicine, which is typically U.S. because of the insurance and all the other stuff, to preventive medicine, where I see more activities in Asia, the system's a little bit more set up, or in Europe? Comment on that and see where that's going?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's true that our economic incentives, again, right? In the U.S. healthcare system is really more set up to treat and be reactive as opposed to being proactive. And just to give an example, for example, if you have an amazing new technology and it's proven to be very safe and very effective, but it's not, the insurance companies are not covering it. There is no existing code that you can just kind of submit to an insurance company. So companies go and talk to insurance companies like, this is our data, it's amazing, it does this, it helps save lives and improves quality of life. Will you pay for it? And the insurance company may look at it and say, well, our average member only stays with our plan for 2 years, and your benefits are coming, 4 or 5 years from now, not interested, right? That's the kind of perverse incentives that sometimes, we face in this. So I think, it is true that some of the, for example, screening technologies, and chronic disease management type of things, are much more advanced in certain parts of Asia than it is here in the U.S., where we don't pay enough attention or incentivize people to do that, and instead, pour all the money into late stage, issues.
Yes, I think it's a mindset thing. And a good example actually is the annual health check in Taiwan and in that part of the world. It's very, very comprehensive. It's not just physical exam. You get really a scan from head to toe. In fact, to confess, I actually goes to Taiwan every year just for the annual health check. So it's more taking a much more preventative approach in that regard.
Nothing to add.
All right. Any other question? Yes. Don't fight, guys.
This kind of shifts the application of the conversation of biotech a little bit, but I want to get your insights into how we can reinvigorate action and investment with the biotech that we're using to address climate change.
Okay, great topic and a great place to watch Asia. The Thailand government, during their APEC year, 2022, established a major government initiative called the, let me get it right now, Biocircular Green Economic Model. And so there's an awful lot of activity going on in Asia that is applying these kinds of technologies. We talked a little bit backstage about sustainable aviation fuel. So that's to the point that it's no longer so much a technology problem as it is a cost problem, right? If you could get the cost down and make enough million gallons of the stuff that the airlines could use, you'd really have something. I think that's definitely an area to watch what's going on in Asia. It's one of those areas where somehow we've politicized climate change, and so it's kind of been too quiet. And it's really a huge problem, but that means in the best Silicon Valley lingo, it's a great opportunity.
I have to say, for the last year or so, I've been working on trying to put together a climate tech incubator on the Berkeley campus, just like our current life sciences one. So I've been very much involved in looking at the economics of all of this. And one of the things I'm really impressed about how much money is floating around in philanthropy to try and do this, because everyone gets the point of doing that. So there's lots of money for that. The major hurdle, so you can get startups going and doing that. The trouble is, it's even worse than the clinical trials in the life sciences space. When you want to, say, do something in concrete as a way of trying to get that done, you know, to check out something, you've got to make a concrete manufacturing plant, right, to do that. And that requires hundreds of millions of investment. And one of the troubles with that area, as well as the agricultural stuff, which isn't taking off nearly as well, is these are commodities, right? When you're dealing with the things in the life sciences space, you can make drugs or antibodies, especially drugs, they're very cheap to make. So when you sell them, the cost of goods is a very tiny fraction of what you're making. When you're trying to sell food, the profit margins are, you know, a few percent or something like that. So it's very difficult to make sort of anything that makes enough money to do it without having a huge thing of scale, right? So if you want to sell food, you've got to do it for, you know, thousands, you know, all sorts of things. And the trouble with the climate right now, there's a plethora of NGOs, by the way, getting involved with this. Every time I meet someone, they tell me another NGO that they know of that's been developed in this, who are all doing policy and why beating their heart about how we should, this is an important problem. When you try to see, for me, the major trouble is to try and find the ways of doing scale up in the climate thing. And particularly one of the troubles is that the people who are the deepest pockets in all of this area, it's all the fossil fuel people. They've got enough money could pay for all of those scale up things. Now, to get them incentivized, right, to try and move away from that is really hard. Let me just say one thing, because this is not quite in this meeting, but I love it. I talked to a company. You know, one of the things we talk about is like, solar wind power is actually cheaper than gas now, so its cost is low. The trouble is we don't have a way of storing it. It's episodic, and batteries, we had lithium mining and all that problem. These guys in the Bay Area here, a company called Rondo, and I'm not involved with them, what they've done is saying what people have known since almost thousands of years is that bricks store heat. So what they've done is take bricks, and they can heat the bricks up to 2,000 degrees Celsius, red hot, right? And then to storage when there's a lot of electricity. Then when the sun goes down, they can pass water or air over this to do a thing to warm up and drive a turbine, right? And this is not going to be, you can't put those in airplanes or cars, right? But you can see for anything doing manufacturing, it'd be terrific. And what is very appealing to me about this is the sort of thing that would work in third world or poor countries, right? Because to just have a big thing with hot bricks in your backyard, so your sunlight could go into a hot brick thing and you could pull it off. This is the sort of technology that we should be aiming for, things which are available to the poor throughout the world, and to try and do it. So there's good stuff, but getting the fossil fuel people to come into this is charge. And let me just say one other thing, because I heard this from the person who runs this in Oxford University in England. He says, one of the biggest mistakes all the people are making are saying, let's divest from the fossil fuel industry. He says, that is a mistake. What we should do is all becoming investors in the fossil fuel industry and becoming partners and forcing them to use their money for the things they should be using them. So we should be taking control over the fossil fuel industries because they have most of the money. So that's a little bit off topic, but you got me on a sore point.
My turn.
More questions?
Well, I'm going to ask a dumb question because I want to take the opportunity having two distinguished professors from two distinguished local universities. I live here for 20-some years. I never understand what's the difference between UCSF and Stanford in its research style or direction or whatever. Because one being public, one being private. You know, I obviously know a lot of people in from the social network, but from your perspective, comprehensively, the Twin Peaks we have here locally, what are the differences of them? And how can they work together? How can they work together or work differently? Divide and conquer for the better effect of results of the biotech research.
Yeah, well, can I?
Go ahead.
You won't hate me.
Go ahead. You first.
Yeah, you know, it's a hard question. I haven't spent a whole lot of time. What to me is actually fairly surprising is how well that Stanford and UCSF work together on this. And just like, we have to, because if you look at, we're competing mainly with the Massachusetts area in Boston, and Harvard and MIT are really, despite their incredible cultural differences, they're working well together. So if we want to keep succeeding, you know, we don't have an option. Stanford and UCSF have to work well together. The little bit difference, and I've been at both, so Stanford tends to be down there with a sort of a richer community, right, living down the peninsula, so it tends to those. The people in here, so that when you go to the general here, you get all the poor and the homeless and the people come out, they're going to be treated. So for a student's point of view, you get more to see what it's like to provide healthcare to the poor than you get if you go down to Stanford. The big advantage of going to Stanford is they have so much money, right? I know people on their board, right, so down there, and they say, you know, if people knew how much money Stanford had, they would never give them another penny. And that's not because they're getting donations, it's because they've got all of this land around there with Hewlett-Packard and all that stuff. So they're landowners, and they're getting all this rent from all these things. So they have incredible amounts of money. The big disadvantage they have, though, is that the city of Palo Alto stops them from building on anymore, so they can't put up new buildings unless they take some down. And what that then means, like both Stanford, I run an incubator on the Berkeley campus, and it's on the campus. It's right on the campus, run by university people. Stanford has an incubator, but it's over in this Stanford Park, and it's run by Alexandria, which is a real estate agent, which is trying to make money out of the incubator. So we're a not-for-profit incubator. We don't have to make money out of this. Stanford has to make money out of it for Alexandria, and it is quite distant from the campus. The nice thing about having an incubator on the campus is the students can come and be interns in those companies and get practical experience of what it's like to be an entrepreneur just by walking across the road. And you can't do that at Stanford, unless, of course, you have your Porsche you can drive over to the...
So I'll add a little bit to this. At the scientific level, you know, of course, everybody has their own particular area of focus in their research, and so you don't want to try to clone each other. But there's an amazing amount of cross-pollination at the level of faculty, at the level of postdocs, you know, not so much in medicine-related areas, but I'm happy to tell people that a lot of my best research assistants got their undergraduate degrees at Berkeley. So, you know, that it happens. I do think that the bureaucratic frameworks have different kinds of traditions, and you almost have to learn a foreign language if you're trying to deal with another university's bureaucracy. It's very complicated. And I came to Stanford after working for the US government. And Stanford was a lot more complicated than the government budgets were. So, you know, you get used to this kind of thing. Where were you when they combined the hospital?
Oh, I was at UCSF.
You were at UCSF.
There was an attempt to try and bring the two together, but...
So it led to a lot of red ink.
Yeah.
And so they, you know, divorced each other after a few years.
I had to say that, you know, if it was a competition between Berkeley and UCSF, which has the more sclerotic administration, I think I would go for Berkeley myself, having been at both. And I think I've got good thing, because I used to work with Jan Napolitano, who was head of Homeland Security, right? And she said, just as you were saying, that coming to the University of California, it was more bureaucratic than the Homeland Security things, right? And she says, of the 10 campuses of the University of California system, Berkeley is the worst in terms of bureaucracy. So, but
there's some direct proportional relationship here, right? Thanks.
So we're going to turn it over now to
Yes.
Margaret. Thank you.
Let's give
We're
our
through.
speakers.
Can we go sit down?
Yes,
Thank you.
let's give our speakers a big round of applause. I feel like we got a glimpse into the future just now. So thank you very much for kicking off our biotech series of programs that we have coming up. There was fantastic opportunities to learn about it, and I'm still thinking about Reg's question at the very beginning about altering minds and mindsets, and if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. So please do join us at our happy hour that's going to be outside. It's nice to see so many countries represented in the room. I'd like to give a welcome to the Consul General of Mongolia, who is new to San Francisco. Thank you for joining us. A few of our upcoming programs that we're doing in San Francisco, Seattle, and in Silicon Valley. Global Trade with a focus on India. That's with Arun Kumar. That's going to be October 10th and a virtual program. Drawing Back the Curtain, a look inside Chinese politics. That's on October 19th in San Francisco. India Unveiled, the State of Markets on October 25th in San Francisco. And of course, we have the APEC Leaders Summit and the CEO Summit. That's going to be hosted by the city of San Francisco in mid-November. Stay tuned for our events. We're hosting a big annual U.S.-China conference on January 18th in Silicon Valley. And I want to thank Howard Chen and Greenberg Traurig. Again, thank you very much for sponsoring this event. Thank you to our A-team, Nina, Christy, Jason, Aaron, all of our interns and volunteers. And thank you again to all of our fantastic speakers. It was really wonderful to hear your expertise. We have drinks and happy hour outside. If you want to exit the building, there is a green button. Don't forget to push that. Otherwise, you will be trapped with us forever inside. Howard, yes?
Can you also recognize the newly arrived Japanese consul? Please.
Welcome. Thank you very much for that. And on behalf of Northern California, thank you for joining us.